Hello and welcome to the next episode in my mini-series dedicated to the well-being in organization and in particular to burnout prevention using process management tools. Again, I don't use the name burnout in the description because it scares people off, and I would like you to pay some attention and maybe learn something interesting about how to establish your well-being, which would be the opposite of burnout. If you establish well-being in your family or in your organization or at your school, you will just get rid of the issues that may lead to burnout. And this is the goal of this podcast mini-series. In the previous episode, we talked about the history of business process management, which is the second chapter of our book. And in the first chapter, we talked about the introduction. The third chapter is dedicated to the concept of business ecology. Actually, we wanted to introduce the concept of burnout, how it came to life and how we observe it and what it is, why it appears and how it comes to life, what is the mechanism behind it. And just to know that the first mention of burnout is very old. I think it was in the 1970s when they first mentioned this one. And the most known paper about burnout is the one in, I think, 1979 or 1981 by Professor Maslach and Professor Jackson. And they made observation that some nurses in the hospitals, they develop a kind of very interesting state. They have to interact with the patients very often, and they write about the US American hospitals where the patient mostly interacts with the nurse and very seldom with the physician. In Austria and Germany it would be a bit different. You interact with the physician more often. But anyway, they observed that the nurses who had to interact with the patients, they developed a kind of feeling of cynicism. They had a high degree of depersonalization, and they had issues with the personal accomplishment. They didn't believe they can change something. And they were interested in the state, why it happened, so what was the reason. As you can imagine, the very obvious reason is the emotionality of the work. Imagine that you have to talk daily to people who are close to death, who are suffering, who have pains. Some of them want to complain, some of them want to cry, some of them want to be heard. And this all overloads the mental capacity of the person who has to listen. And at the end, as it was their work, and if they had to interact very often with these people, they developed a kind of resistance, but in a negative sense. They disengaged from the communication with people. So disengagement, depersonalization was one of the symptoms of what they called burnout. We call it syndrome of burnout, but it is not an illness, it's not a disease, and the World Health Organization states that it is a work-related phenomenon. We are not specialists again, I just tell you my suggestion, but feel free to criticize it if I'm wrong. But the symptoms of burnout are very close to the symptoms of depression, and there is plenty of research that shows that people who score high on the scale of burnout may also have depression, and those who score high on the scale of depression may also have burnout. The difference is that the depression is a clinical state. It's really the situation where you have to go to a physician, where you have to do with a clinical physician, not to a psychologist. You really have to go to somebody who will help you to work with this issue. If we talk about, again, it depends on the country, because if I said not to psychologists, but let's say in Ukraine, psychologists are usually those people who make pedagogical psychology, who can support you, talk to you, but they cannot prescribe you the medicine. So just to be aware, we also have clinical psychologists, but in your country, maybe you have to go exactly to a psychologist. The difference between the burnout and the depression is that burnout is work-related. It appears as a result of the work, but it disappears after you leave the work. And I observed several situations. I used to be in the situation. I used to observe many people who are now or used to be in the situation when they are having this burnout state at work, but then they go to family, go to friends, completely relaxed, have a nice life. Here you have to bear in mind that, of course, the negativism from this burnout situation at work can have spillover effects on family, and maybe the person who is exhausted will also bring this exhaustion home and may not just simply switch, but he or she can do it, in difference to depression where you are in the same state. At night, in the morning, you cannot get out from your bed. You cannot start doing something. This is a very different situation. And the second thing that you have to bear in mind that burnout can lead to depression. Burnout can be one of the triggers for depression. And those people who are prone to depressions based on genetically predispositions can suffer from burnout and can have it triggering depression. There's also plenty of research that says that burnout can lead to depression, but we differentiate between these two states. So now, when they started investigating what burnout is, they started a big debate, and it became very interesting because researchers from different fields said that we have something like this. These are not only the nurses, these are not only the physicians who have it. We have it at schools, we have it in firms. What is then wrong with the situation? What is burnout? And there were plenty of studies about burnout, and burnout is a well-investigated phenomenon. We have already different theories that explain burnout. We have different tools that measure burnout. And mostly, of course, they are developed by psychologists because it is their field, their discipline, trying to understand how people feel. One of the recent development in the field of burnout is the Copenhagen burnout inventory that differs from the idea of Maslach because they have different conceptualization. They root their conceptualization of burnout in the thoughts of Schaufeli and Demaruti and Baker, who actually said that burnout is mostly about the mental and cognitive exhaustion. It's not about the disengagement, it's not about the depersonalization, it's not about the cynicism, because these states are usually either the predecessors, and this disengagement is the way to save your resources to not to get into burnout. And the depersonalization or cynicism appears already or can appear as a result of burnout because it's your way to save your psychological resources and not to engage too much. So that's why you always have to see it. What is the coping mechanism, how I can cope with the issue of burnout? Like I'm trying not to, being cynical is by the way, just trying to not to be too emotionally touched or emotionally connected to the conversation. So this can be your coping mechanism of how you want to cope with the challenging situation when you have not so many psychological resources left. And this is more or less the development of the concept of burnout. We still work on it, but interestingly, we have different theories that explain why burnout appears. And one of the theories that we refer to in our book is the job demands and resources model. It comes again from Schaufeli, Baker, Demaruti, and other scholars, other followers. These are the three names that are usually associated with this theory. And they said that actually it's about the balance between the psychological and physiological job demands and job resources. And job demands are those aspects of work that steal your energy. Things that are exhausting, things that require a lot of concentration, things that require a lot of emotional labor. These are things that make you tired at the end of the day. And the job resources are the things that bring you energy. Acknowledgement, support, additional days off, nice constellation at work, nice team at work, nice friends at work, good colleagues, good working place, good monitor, having a nice seat somewhere, having a quiet condition. These are all the job resources, things that give you energy or do not allow your mental energy to be depleted very fast. Because the quiet condition will not bring you energy, let's be honest, but working in a quiet condition will not deplete you energy so hard as working in a noisy condition. So they offered the idea of these job demands and job resources, and actually it's about the balance of these two. Because every work is demanding. Whatever you do, it demands some energy. You have to walk, you have to go to work, you have to focus, you have to talk, so it's always depleting some energy. But the idea is that at the end of the day, you go home, spend time with your family, you replenish your energy. You go sleep a nice long night, and you have your energy replenished. And every few months, you can take 1 week or several weeks vacation, go on vacation and replenish your energy. And if everything is fine, then you will not get into the state of burnout. Yet, if you spend more energy than you can replenish, if you have to work hard and you cannot sleep well, just because of the conditions when you have too many things in mind, you cannot fall asleep. Many of my colleagues, after teaching or after a certain presentation or certain thing that happened at work, they cannot fall asleep. They have very short night and sleep without almost no deep sleep. So they get to work exhausted next day, and they have again to undergo different things that happen there, emotional labor, conflicts, misconceptions, misunderstandings, communication issues, just simple hard work, mentally demanding work, working with a lot of numbers, and so on. If it continues that they spend more energy that they can replenish, then once they will come to the situation when they will not be able to work. They will lose their energy. This is called the emotional or cognitive exhaustion or mental exhaustion. You just cannot concentrate anymore. You just don't have power and you need vacation, but sometimes you cannot take it. Those who are researchers, they know, or professors at universities, they know that usually we take vacations when students are on vacations. But in the middle of semester, you are not allowed to. So if you are close to the situation, you cannot do anything against it, then most likely you'll get into the state of burnout. And the trick with the burnout is that if you get there, it's like a small click. And afterwards, everything is dim. Everything is bad. Everything is negative. You don't want to go to work. If you go to work, you see the only negative terms. You see all the issues. You don't see any opportunities. You disengage. You try to leave your place, go somewhere, talk to other colleagues, but not do the work. You try to find out, it's called the absenteeism, different engagements somewhere, just not to be on your workplace. And whatever happens, you become cynical. So these are the consequences of burnout. And if you already are in this state, getting back from this state is very hard. Usually people go to a physician, to a psychologist, but as burnout is not an illness, the physician cannot prescribe anything. But the physicians are clever and they usually introduce something like a spine ache, a lack of concentration, and try to find something that they have in the list of illnesses, and then they prescribe usually from 2 weeks up to 4 months of a prescription to go somewhere to stay away from work. And interestingly, most likely you will not go back to your work, just because when you recover, and you will, it's easy to recover, just you need some time to spend with your family, with your friends, go somewhere, just replenish the energy. But all the time you will know that if I go back to work, the things will be the same. The same amount of work, the same amount of stress, and very few hours of sleep in the night. Let's assume this is the case. And this makes people disbelieve that they can get rid of burnout, or they know that if I'm not in a burnout right now, but I will get into it as soon as I'm back in an organization, which leads to the high employee turnover. People just go to another organization just to have a change. As the initial recording was way too long, I decided to split this episode in 2 parts. Wish you all the best. Thank you for being with me, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.